Here we go. Okay. Father Diane, good morning. I hope you can hear me. Yes? Excellent.
Yes, Father. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Whoops. Now I need to turn this on too. My goodness. This is the age of buttons. Wow. Here we go. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Now you have voice. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Blessed Trinity, we love you, we adore you, and we thank you for your many blessings, for the gift of life, and for having us once again here as we come to the last lecture of this cohort that has persevered to the bitter end. Okay, and I'm very grateful that all these students have persevered through 15 months of these bioethical issues, the full gamut that we've covered, that you, Lord, has allowed us to cover and to inspire us, seeking always your truth, your life on these issues, seeking to uphold the dignity and the sanctity of human life, and also care for the environment, for the creation that you have given to us, Lord, to care for in this world. We pray in a very special way for all your people throughout the world, especially those who are in most need of your divine mercy at this time. We ask this as we ask all things in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay, so first thing I need to announce is I forgot the gowns, and so, but I'm living very nearby, so at the break, I'm gonna get Dash over there and bring them over, okay? So if anyone is interested, because if none of you are interested in the gowns, so some are, yeah, okay, you can.
Yeah, because we have to wear it at graduation.
It's for graduation, so I hope that 5 months from now you'll be able to come back and walk, okay? I apologize that we used to have a graduation in May and another one in December, but it's a bit of a ticket and the university is cutting down all extra expenses right now, so it's just one in May, which is where the majority of the students are graduating, all right? So hopefully in a few years, if we're able to build up the numbers again, we'll go back to those two. It's a numbers issue. If we have enough students that will warrant it, then they'll put it back on again. All right, having said that, any questions or comments from any previous stuff about some darkness in the room? You still take notes there, right? All right, so this healthcare has been taught as you have participated in by a number of medical doctors, all right, who are all experts in their different fields. And hopefully it has been profitable for you to hear it directly from them, because that's not really my competence, except the one topic that I'm going to talk about today on transplantation, that what I'm more familiar with, okay? But hopefully it's been, I've listened also to the presentations, and these doctors, they all happen to belong to a team that is the Catholic Medical Association. It's a national organization. It's actually international, but it's very strong here in the US. There are about 90 chapters throughout the US of the Catholic Medical Association. And you know, we have 7 dioceses in the state of Florida, the Archdiocese of Miami being one of them. And all other dioceses have a chapter of the CMA, of the Catholic Medical Association, except us in Miami. You know, there was a historical reason for that, but the fact is that we, being the largest diocese of the state by density and Catholic population, we did not have a chapter. So about 3 years ago, maybe 4 now, we started a new chapter of the Catholic Medical Association. It's called the Miami chapter of the CMA, and all these doctors are members of it, and I'm the chaplain for that organization. So I'm very happy that they were able to collaborate this way and actually give you the presentations, okay? All right, now we're gonna move into this topic of transplantation. And there are 2 types of donors, if you will, which are either living or cadaveric, Okay, so we're going to look some basic principles first, some background review of vital organs and organs that can be transplanted, and then we're going to get into the details, a little bit of detail of either living or cadaveric, because there are somewhat different protocols and bioethical issues associated with each. Okay, so moving forward then, first, some of the biology. There are different types of donations or organs and tissues depending on who's doing the donation, who's doing the receiving, who's the donor, who's the receiver. And we have these three basic words, three basic concepts: autograft, allograft, and xenotransplantation. Okay, so autograft or autologous means that the transplant is from the same person, For example, tissue, skin tissue. One part of the body gets burned, right? And then another part of the body can donate tissue to replace that burned tissue. That's called autograft or autologous donation. And that is the easiest one. Of course, it's not for all organs. Obviously, a major organ cannot be replaced this way, right? But mostly at the tissue level. And it bypasses the immune rejection issue. So it's ideal for that. Okay? But it's kind of restricted and limited. The other one then, the more common one, is the allograft. The allograft, which means from one individual to another, all right? And here, the donor, which is necessarily another person, a separate person, then is either a living donor, and some organs can be donated while living, a few, or more likely cadaveric, in other words, someone who's already dead, has been declared dead, clinically dead, all right? And then finally, xenotransplantation is a reference to another species. And there are some organs and tissues that can be received from other species. Well, not full organs yet. Even if we were to grow a human organ in an individual, it's not truly a xenotransplantation in the sense that the organ is human, even though it's being grown in an animal. But the classical one are the pig valves, the heart valves, because it happens that the heart of the pig is very similar to the heart of the human, okay? And so the valves of the heart for years now have been used from the pig to be transplanted into human. Okay, so that's some basic terminology there. Now, just a brief review of vital organs. This goes back to the end-of-life course at the beginning of this year, when we covered the end-of-life issues, and we looked at vital organs: the heart, the kidney, the liver, the lungs, pancreas, intestine, thymus gland can be also transplanted. And the most common ones, of course, are the kidney, the liver, and the heart, in that order. Okay, the kidney by far is the one that is most demand, and it's also the one that is most transplantable, including living donations. So here we go. Living organ transplants can be the kidney, the liver, and the lung. Okay. From the kidney, of course, this is with regards to the donor. Donate one kidney and keep on living as long as the other kidney is functioning well. From the liver, it's a section. The liver has 3 lobes, and 1 lobe can be donated, and it basically regenerates because the liver has a lot of regeneration power. And then from the lungs, it's interesting because we actually have, remember when we looked at vital organs there at the end of life course, how many lungs do we actually have? 5 lobes, exactly, 5 lobes, 2 and 3, right? So one lung has 2 lobes and the other lung has 3 lobes. And one can live with 2 lobes a sedentary life. You know, they're not going to run the mile or anything like that, but they can live a sedentary life, walking around slowly and so forth, but having just a normal sedentary life with 2 lobes, which means that a person, for example, with emphysema could receive a lung transplant from living, but they need 2 donors because they would only take out one of the 5 lungs, one of the 5 lobes from a donor, all right? They don't take out 2 lobes, only 1 lobe, because they don't want to compromise the life of the donor significantly. And therefore, one can live with 4 lungs and basically do the same as with 5, as far as activity. So one can donate 1 lobe, but then you need a second donor to donate the other lobe for the recipient who needs 2 lobes. All right, so it's more complicated. And then you have the immune issue, which now you have to do a typing, a match, not only with 1 donor, but with 2 donors. So it gets complicated. However, the advantage of living donors is that those organs are fresh and they last longer, in contrast to cadaveric organs, which typically have a life expectancy of about half the time, half the number of years than a living organ, a living donor organ, all right? They have average about half the time. The cadaveric organs, because the person has already died and there's been a few hours that organ has already been deprived of nutrients and oxygen and so forth. So that organ has begun to die already, right? I'll talk in more detail how those cadavers, the organs are kept alive, even though the person is dead, just with support, with vital support. We'll get there. Okay, so we're just beginning the issue here that of the vital organs, the most common that are transplanted are the kidney, liver, and the heart. And of those 2 can be done while living, and then the lung also, but it's less common. Now there's also a heart-lung transplant together, which is actually easier to do than just individual heart or lung. Okay, we'll get to that. Tissues. Tissue, again, is a little more broad. You have bone grafts that can be done. For example, when there's bone loss in the jaw, then they can take bone from other parts of the body, typically the femur or other parts, or the hip bone, and graft it into the jaw. Would that be an allograft or an autograft? Taking bone from the hip, a person who has, take off the stuff. A person who has bone loss on the jaw, right? Osteoporosis or something like that. Or maybe an accident. And the surgeons are going to use bone from the hip, for example. Would that be an allograft or an autograft? Autograft. It's coming from the same patient, from the same person. They'll use bone from the hip to populate bone on the jaw, right? And so it doesn't it bypasses the immune rejection. It's immune compatibility, right?
Where would a muscle be?
Muscle, yes, muscle can be transplanted. I don't know exactly, I'm not familiar, bless you, but I know that muscle can be transplanted from one part of the body to another.
Because that's what they tell me I might need for this.
Yes. Okay. There you go.
I can't do it. I won't do it until June. So
I see. Okay. So
tissues are already dead.
It's dead. Okay. So muscle goes into what is known as muscle waste, will self-consume, and what we call people who are starving, skin and bones. Literally, what has happened is that the body has self-digested first the fat, and then the body continues to digest into the muscle tissue, all right? And the muscles will atrophy also for lack of exercise. Muscles will atrophy, but if there's some little fiber of muscle left, that muscle can be built up little by little with therapy and exercise and proper nutrition. That muscle can be built up and grow and recover its health. Okay, other tissues, tendons can also be transplanted from one part of the body to another or from a different person. which then would have to deal with the immune rejection issue, which can be dealt with. The eye, for example, the Lion's Eye Bank, right? Lion's Eye Bank, that's what they save, is the cornea of the eye. And if you haven't donated your eyes, you can put that on the license. In fact, you can donate your whole body to organs donation. It goes on the license, organ donor. Skin, I talked about skin grafts, the valves of the heart, nerves also, some nerves can be actually transplanted. Veins for sure, for varicose veins and stuff like that. Sometimes they take veins from the legs to bypass coronary veins in the heart. All right, so very creative, innovative surgeries are being done today. And then finally, the stem cells, which obviously would be adult stem cells. Adult stem cells taken from different parts of the body. Now, scientists are discovering an increasing number of sources of stem cells in the body, including even the easiest one now is in the blood, that we have a few stem cells in the blood. They are called hematopoietic, meaning that they are from the mesenchyme, from the mesoderm layer, originally from the embryo. All right, these are layers that form precisely muscle and bone and other organs of the body, internal organs. And so they're very good quality. They are multipotent, they're not pluripotent, which is a good thing. They're coaxed already into particular organs and tissues, and they're taken from the blood. So the process is similar to platelet extraction. Have you ever, it's not as simple as a blood donation, you know, of a pint of blood. It's a little more complicated, but it is similar to a process called pheresis. I don't know if any of you have done pheresis. Pheresis is for donating platelets. What are platelets?
I don't know, it looks yellow.
Yeah, it's yellowish, creamy, yellowish color, right? And like plasma, or of course it's in the liquid plasma section of the fraction of the blood. And platelets are for coagulation, for forming a scab. That's what forms a scab, together with RBCs that get caught in that fiber, the platelet fibers. And that's why it looks brownish, because eventually those RBCs continue to rust and they turn brownish, okay? And but that's the platelets. So hemophilics, for example, lack platelets or have difficulty. Cancer patients sometimes, because their immune system is compromised, and so they need platelet transfusion. The platelet transfusion is, I've done it a few times. You're laid out on a bed, and it looks a little similar to the other one, dialysis, in that you're stretched out in a bed and there's a machine next to you. They take out the blood from one arm and are filtering, but in this case, they're not filtering toxins from the blood, they're filtering platelets. They're actually filtering out live cells, okay? So all that goes on inside that sophisticated machine, and then they pump back the rest of the blood into the system. And we recover our platelets, we produce new platelets, no problem, typically in the bone marrow. And so at the end of about 2 or 3 hours, there's a little bag of the platelets that can then be given to the hospital, sometimes to babies or other people that are undergoing therapy. So the process for obtaining stem cells is similar. They would obtain even a smaller amount of stem cells. But what I'm trying to say by all this is that now it can be done with a process that is minimally invasive, if you will. Essentially, it's just a needle puncture and a couple hours that you need to be there watching a movie or something or reading a book. You do get cold because the machine cools down the blood, and when you get the blood back, it's cold blood, literally, it's cold blood. And so I keep asking for blankets. At the end of the session, I end up with about 4 or 5 blankets on top of me.
It takes about 45 minutes.
Now? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
The one I did.
Oh, nice, excellent. Okay, so that's
45
faster.
minutes.
That's great. I'm glad that
But
they've
it's not
speeded up.
comfortable.
But it does get cold, doesn't it? Yeah. But then,
Related with the topic.
Yeah.
When you donate blood,
mhm,
you donate it for free.
right.
But now, the person that gets to use that blood that needs it has to pay for that.
Well, they do, but they're paying for what? You see, just the starting material, if you will, the raw material, which is the blood, right? That is coming for free. But what doesn't come for free is the processing of all that blood. For example, I understand that one of the first things that they do in the States is, in the United States, is they separate the blood, okay, from different components of the blood. And so there's a lot of manipulation that goes on with very technical, highly specialized personnel, which are on salary. And then the equipment that is used and the quality control in a sterile environment, all that. So that is jacking up the price, all right? And that's what is the cost. Similar to an aspirin, for example, that at the drugstore is 20 cents, but in a hospital situation, an aspirin comes out to be about $5 by the time the patient receives the aspirin, okay? Simply because of all the overhead. And that's the challenge there, okay? Since you mentioned it and we're on it, and it's part of, in fact, transplant, you know, blood transplant is a transplant because blood is actually an organ, remember? It's more than a tissue because he has tissues, different tissues that have similar properties or similar functions. So blood is actually an organ and is the only liquid organ in the body, but it's considered, technically it's considered an organ. It's more than tissue. We got RBCs have one function, right? White blood cells have a different function, the immune system. The platelets we just mentioned, they're involved in coagulation. That's the third function, and so forth. So really, when you look at blood, it's so rich in different tissues that it's actually an organ. It qualifies as an organ. Anyway, there has been talk back and forth of whether to pay or not to pay for blood donations, because blood donations, ever since the HIV scare, blood donations have dropped tremendously, dramatically, okay? So that also has put a lot of pressure on the institution, on the healthcare system to try to do with less blood because there's less blood available. But you see that these agencies that collect blood, they have become very, very proactive, and I periodically get messages on my phone, is your time to donate again, and we'll give you 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 tickets for a movie. How many do you want? How many tickets do you want for your blood? You know, they're not supposed to give you money, for example. And I remember in the 70s, way back, they used to give money. And in fact, I was a student at FIU one time, and I went and donated blood because they gave me $20. But what was happening is that the homeless were coming in to donate with all their illnesses, okay? And then that blood was no good because it was contaminated. And so that was a waste. And that's the problem with donation, is that it attracts donors that don't really qualify. So anyway, we got to keep it like that as a donation, but they can give incentives. All right. Tissues, in contrast to organs, can be frozen and preserved, therefore, all right? But the organs have to be fresh, and also cadaveric organs. Now, having said that, they are actually, once they are extracted or procured, harvested, is the word, from the cadaver, they are put in ice, but they're not frozen as such, but they are put in ice directly. And it's not dry ice, okay? It's not CO2, it's not dry ice. It's just regular ice, but that's to lower the metabolism of the organ so that it's not, it goes kind of dormant and it doesn't die as fast. And again, the lifespan of each organ is particular specific, but in general, the window is about 24 hours maximum. And keep in mind that sometimes this involves transport from one part of the country to another, all right? So UPS style or FedEx style.
I used to see those for
Yes,
FedEx.
in FedEx.
Quite a lot.
Yeah.
And,
Uh-huh.
we'd always keep it
Packed in
inside
ice. Right,
and not take it out to the warehouse
exactly.
until the truck is ready to leave.
Ready.
Take them out.
There you go, yeah. It takes special handling.
Yeah,
It does.
special hand.
Mhm.
I also do that with reptiles.
Yes,
Yeah,
interesting.
ship a lot of reptiles.
Wow. Yeah, the pet industry is a big one, and it is a multi-million dollar industry. And the pets are kind of frozen. They're because they're cold temperature, right? They're cold-blooded, and so it's like the iguanas. They start falling off the trees when it gets cold. Okay, forward. Now we have to look at the issue for allografts, right, and for xenotransplantation, the issue of immune rejection, because even for allografts, it is the same species. In other words, it's coming from another human being, from another Homo sapiens, but it's not the same individual. And therefore, we all have a particular immune system. We have particular genetics that are very individualized. And so we have literally genetic fingerprinting in our DNA that makes us unique biochemically, so that when we receive a transplant, when we receive an organ from another human being who's the same species, there will be an immune rejection because our body will consider that organ as a foreign object. And our immune system will attack it and try to kill it, all right, as a foreign object. And therefore, what has to happen is that for the recipient, their immune system has to be toned down, not shut down 100%, because then they become susceptible to just the bacteria and the viruses that we're breathing in and out every day of our lives, okay? But it's toned down. So the immune system, there are immunosuppressants, the drugs that are taken to tone down the immune system, but not shut it down totally, okay? All right, so there has to be also a match at the same time, and there are many proteins factors. They're mostly proteins, because the proteins are the expression of our DNA. It is the DNA that is fingerprinted, if you will. It's the DNA of each one of us that is unique, has unique regions, but that gets expressed into the protein, all right? So the level of expression is an issue of the proteins, okay? And so they look for a match. They look for a match between the donor and the recipient, whether the donor is living or cadaveric, all right? And they look at a panel of proteins and other factors, mostly in the blood, to see what kind of match there is, right? So there's a matching scale, and that matching scale typically goes like from 1 to 4 or something like that. 4 being the maximum match, 1 being the minimal match. And for example, who do you expect would have a number 4 match?
Brothers or no, mother and daughter?
Well, they may have like a 3, but identical twins would have a 4, okay? That's the level of match, because 4 is maximum. So identical twins, right? Monozygotic twins that came from a single zygote. In other words, they have essentially the same DNA, except for whatever mutations they picked up along the way as they were growing individually, all right? So that's a 4 match. Anything else is like a 3.5 or 3.9 and below, all right? So mother-daughter, siblings, non-twins, they will have typically a good match around 3, but not necessarily. Then as you get further out from the family circle, on average, the match goes down, down, down to the minimal, which would be a 1, and typically 1 and 2 do not qualify, but from like 2.5 forward, they start considering, depending on how healthy the 2 individuals are, depending on other factors also, like age and ethnicity, they belong to the same race and so forth. So probably from about 2.5 forward, they start considering, the team would start considering the possibility of the transplant, okay? So the match is one thing, but it's not the only thing. It also depends how tolerant the recipient is to the immunosuppressants and how well that immune system can be toned down, because obviously the more it's toned down, the more likely the recipient will be able to accept the organ, right? So it has to see, it's very individualized. In other words, the whole issue of organ donation and transplantation is very individualized. All right, but there are some general things like this. They do is a panel reactive antibody level, all right, or PRA for short, PRA, panel reactive antibody. And the antibodies, these are proteins that are checked to see how sensitive the individual is, or if the individual has become sensitized either from a previous transplantation or from pregnancy or from blood transfusions also. Because in a blood transfusion, unless we can also do auto blood transfusion, right? Sometimes, and this I think is more common in Europe, someone going for surgery, maybe even months before, they start donating blood to themselves. They start donating blood because the body builds up the blood. It typically is an 8-week window, all right? And they'll donate, and then that's saved. And then when they have the operation, they have their blood, or they use an equivalent. So they donate 3 pints, and then they get 3 pints from someone else, and they do that kind of exchange. All right, but if we get a blood transfusion from that is not an auto donation, then that taking a blood transfusion is also an organ transplant in a sense, and that can sensitize us to certain proteins from the blood of that other individual. Okay, so that all has to do with what is known as the PRA score. PRA score.
So for the blood transfusions,
Yeah.
You not only consider the type of blood, but
Right.
also if it's a match or not. Like,
Correct. Yes.
You go by with.
That's for bringing that up. Yes. So there are at least 2 factors in the blood that are considered for the match, right? Even if the person is not receiving a blood transfusion, so actually receiving a kidney, a liver, or a heart, right? The blood type of the donor must match the blood type of the recipient. And we have 2 types. Okay, so we have the ABO group, and then we have the RH, positive or negative. So there are 2 different types of proteins, all right, or factors. What's the ABO? The ABO group is the one that we're more familiar with, which are 4 types, blood types. The classical, A type, B type, AB type, and O type. O, which is actually 0, all right? So let's just review that very briefly. It means that there are 2 types of proteins, 2 structures of proteins on the surface of the RBC. And one type of protein is called the A protein, and the other type of protein is called the B protein. Now we have 4 possibilities. Either we have on all our RBCs, all of the RBCs, okay? They either have A protein on the surface of the cell, or they have B protein, or they have both proteins, AB, and that's the AB type, or they have none of the proteins, neither A nor B, and that's the O type, which is actually 0. It's 0. They have 0 A and 0 B. And those makes the 4 classical blood types that we know about. What type are you? A, B, AB, or O type, right? Okay, then we look at percentages in the population, because you have universal donors, universal recipients, right? Because A-type blood, right? If I'm A-type, I can only receive blood from A-type. Because otherwise, if I receive blood from B-type, my A antigens are going to attack the B as a foreign body, and that's all the RBCs in the whole blood. So it's going to supercoagulate inside my body. It's going to kill me, all right? So A-type can only receive from A-type. The same argument goes for B. A B-type can only receive from B-type, right? How about AB? AB can receive from A or from B because AB is compatible with both A and B. So AB can receive blood from A, can receive blood from B, and can receive blood from AB. Now, what is O? O is 0. 0 meaning that I don't have the protein. In fact, I am O. So I don't have either A or B protein, which means I cannot receive blood from A, I cannot receive blood from B, I cannot receive blood from AB, but I can receive blood from O.
That's the most rare one.
Exactly. So O, and then the other three types can also receive from O, because A can receive from A or from O, because O doesn't have either A or B, so it's kind of neutral, right? So A can receive from A or O. B can receive from B or O, because O is neutral. AB can receive from A, B, AB, and O. And O can only receive from O. All right? So you got universal recipient is A. I'm sorry, AB. AB is universal recipient because it can receive blood from any group. Universal donor is O because O can give to every group. And then it's a ratio in the population. Thanks be to God that the most prevalent type is O. It's the most prevalent. So universal donor is the most prevalent, and therefore most likely on average, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's significant. You know, it's maybe 60, 70, 80% of the population is O type. Thanks be to God, because then we can receive, it's more easy to find an O type.
I didn't
Right?
know that.
Yes.
I thought it was the other way around.
And no, it's thanks be to God, it's that way. And that's actually an evolutionary process. It has over the evolution, you know, it has worked that way. Whereas the more red types, I think, are A and B, or maybe AB, I'm not sure, but in general, those other three types are most rare, okay? And so that's how it works out.
And the positive and the negative?
Then, aside from those two proteins, the A protein and the B protein, which you can see have 4 possible combinations, right? Then you have the Rh factor, which, if you recall way back, comes from the rhesus monkey. That's why the rhesus, no, I didn't cover this. Rhesus is Rh. That's where we get, because the rhesus monkey is an experimental monkey, but it's spelled Rh, R-H-E-S-U-S. There it is, the rhesus monkey. This is what it looks like. It's an old world monkey, meaning in Asia, Southeast Asia. It's an ugly fellow. And there it is. And this rhesus monkey, just for the sake of convenience, I don't know, has certain properties, has been used in the lab, all right? And it was discovered that this monkey has the same protein that we have in our cell, again in the RBCs, which is a protein which is known as the Rh protein, simply because Rh is the first 2 letters of the monkey, RH, RHE. All right, so that's called the Rh factor. And that Rh factor, we either have it or don't have it. And it's just a single factor, meaning a single protein. So we either have the Rh protein or we don't have the Rh protein. So that makes our RBCs Rh positive if we have it, or Rh negative if we don't have it. But you understand that it's a third protein on the coating of the RBCs that has nothing to do with either the A or the B protein, right? And that's why we have to be type when we're serotyped. When we're serotyped with 2 characteristics. O negative, for example. What does O negative mean? That I'm O negative. I don't have the A protein, I don't have the B protein, and I don't have the Rh protein. I'm deprived of all these proteins, okay? O positive would be a person without the A protein, without the B protein, and with the Rh protein, because they're O positive. And so on and so forth, you can work out all the others, you know. So for every blood type, you actually have 2 sets, the positive and the negative. So you have A positive, A negative, B positive, B negative, etc. So you end up really total with just those factors. You end up with 8 types, right? 4 that are positive and 4 that are negative according to the Rh factor. And all that has to match. All that has to match with the recipient. All right, so that's part of the matching. And that's a big part of the matching, but not all of it. And so that is actually, that's all that serotyping that is done, because there's a reference to the serum in the blood, and that's how it's done, all right? And again, to tone down the thing, immunosuppressant drugs are used, like Prograf and Myophoric and other drugs that are used to tone down the immune system of the donor or the recipient? Question. Immunosuppressants are for the donor or the recipient? The recipient. The donor is getting rid of the organ, okay? And the cadaveric organ donor doesn't need anything. Okay, so the immunosuppressant is on the recipient side. Okay, moving forward. So, you know, this can get pretty sophisticated. It's no sense going into great detail. Just know that it's personalized medicine, all right? The match has to be one-on-one from donor to recipient. And several factors are involved in it. It's all at the immune level. All right, now, the scientific community, the clinical community has become very creative to try to find a match that is a good match, all right? And the typical case is with kidneys, but it can also be done with other organs. And this is called domino transplants, When, let's say I'm a donor and I'm donating to a recipient, but we're not a good match. We're less than a 2, all right? What will happen? But I am a good match. There's another pair over here, donor recipient. They're not a good match among themselves either. But it happens that donor 2 is a good match to my recipient 1. And I am donor 1, I'm a good match for recipient 2. So they do the flip-flop, okay? Donor 1 gives to the recipient 2, and donor 2 gives to recipient 1 because those are better matches. And that's a simple case of domino. It gets more complicated, and I'll show you a case now where they did, the record so far is 30 donors and 30 recipients. We'll look at it in a minute. It is amazing. It is amazing. I'll show you the case in a minute.
I was looking something else really fast.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get there. It was in 2012. It's a couple of, I think it's the next slide. First, let's stick with the, because it's so exciting, I always jump the gun, but let's look at just the basic principles here. Donor transplants involves more than 1 pair, all right? And it can be done with the heart, the lung, and the most common one is with the kidney. For example, here's a case of cystic fibrosis. The recipient needs both lungs, okay? CF is a gradual buildup of fibers in the lungs so that the patient eventually cannot breathe. She's gonna get locked out. Okay, she cannot. So it's actually easier, Henry, maybe you can wait until, or wanna leave it ajar, it doesn't matter. What I'm trying to say is it's locked from the outside. Yeah. Okay. So this is what we have. It's actually easier, surgery-wise, it's easier to replace the whole thorax. In other words, to replace heart and lungs together. Because I'm thinking out loud here, most likely because of the pulmonary circulation, all right? You know, we have 2 types of circulation in the body. We have the circulation to the body, from the heart to the body, to feed the heart and to feed the body, all the organs and systems of the body, and to pick up the CO2 and all that. But then we have another circulation from the heart to the lungs, back and forth. So we really have like a double circulation going on, all right? And for cystic fibrosis, what needs replacement is the lungs. But it's actually easier surgically wise to leave the heart on the pulmonary circulation intact instead of just carving out the lungs and replacing the lungs. So they do a heart-lung transplant. And all they have to actually cut and reconnect fewer arteries and veins. Basically just the arteries and veins that are going to the body, which would be 2, right? The aorta and then the vena cava coming back to the heart. All right, as opposed to the pulmonary arteries and veins and so forth. So bottom line, it's just easier surgically to replace both heart and lungs together as a package. But the heart of the cystic fibrosis patient is intact. It's not affected by the cystic fibrosis under the lungs. So when they take out the heart and lung of the cystic fibrosis patient, what do they have? They have no good lungs, but they have a good heart. So that's actually a living heart transplant that can happen. Now, that patient is going to get a new set, typically from a cadaver, because that patient needs to get a heart and lung package that is going to be cadaveric. All right? So he's getting a dead heart and donating a living heart, when you think about it. Or he's getting a heart from a cadaver, all right? But what he needs is the lungs. But it's just that, again, for the sake of surgery, it's easier to transplant the whole package, heart and lung together. It's amazing. This is the one case where a person can actually donate a living heart, right? It's a very restricted window, but it can happen. And so, in fact, that was done in 2016 at Stanford, where the recipient donated a good heart that went to a second patient that had a bad heart. But his lungs, or her lungs, I don't know if it was male or female, but the lungs of that other patient, the lungs were intact. They didn't have cystic fibrosis. They only needed the heart, the good heart of the cystic fibrosis patients, okay? So that's pretty creative, fantastic, and it's been done. There it is. More common though, so that would be a kind of a domino transplant in the sense that it's going from one patient to another. Okay? More common, much more common is with the kidney. And so this is how it starts. We start with a pair, one pair, donor recipient. They're not a good match. But there's another pair, themselves are not good match either, but they could be good match with the first pair, crisscrossing, okay? So again, donor 1 is a good match with the recipient 2, and donor 2 is a good match with the recipient 1. So that would be a simple case, and that's called, actually, that has the name pair exchange. It's called pair exchange. All right. That surgery is done simultaneously. That involves 4 surgeries simultaneously, okay? And this could also be done with living donors, right? And they're all done simultaneously, so nobody can back down, because if you do it sequentially, the problem is that once the recipient 2 gets the donor 1 kidney, then the donor 2 may walk away because their recipient already got the kidney. All right, so that's a danger. And of course, this is all on a voluntary basis. So the 4 surgeries are done simultaneously in 2 theaters or 4 theaters, surgical theaters, boom, 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 and done. The matches also are kept anonymous so that there's no issue with possible paying the person under the table or something like that, or giving other kinds of promises for the living organ, all right? Now, I need to go back here and talk a little bit more about this exciting case that was done in 2012. And this is the famous 60 domino kidney. You can punch it in. I gave you, it was on all over the news, and this is one from the Telegraph, the London Telegraph is a newspaper in Great Britain, but it was all over. And here I give you the link of the report, right? So it all began with this one fellow who was at his yoga class, and some other friend told him about the possibility of donating a kidney while living and keep on living. And so the guy considered it and followed through, and he started actually a chain that involved 30 donors and 30 recipients, all living, all right? It was record time. Of course, all the planning that went in beforehand, the amount of planning and the match, the mismatch and the cross match and all that went on. This is across the U.S. I had the statistics somewhere. I can see now that I actually used the wrong PowerPoint because, yeah, it involved, like 10 different hospitals across 30 different states in the U.S. and it was done like in 4 or 5 months, the whole thing. Yeah. Donors typically were flying or recipients, and it was all lined up, boom, 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 one after the other, okay? And the chain kept going, the dominoes kept going. So like you had, for example, donor 1 given to recipient 2, then donor 2 given to recipient 3, and so on and so forth. And the chain kept going like that and that until the very last one. And the big danger, of course, is at any one point, any donor can back out because their recipient has already received. So the recipient receives before the donor gives, except for the very first one, right? Or the first one is actually the last one to receive, or who knows how they work out. The point is that it's sequential. And they actually encountered that problem once they had started the chain. About halfway down or 1/3 of the way down, one donor was having second thoughts. Okay, now, and the big question is, will that actually kill the whole chain from there on down the chain? Not necessarily. I mean, let's say that donor 5 or let's say donor 10, let's put it down the chain of the 30, 1/3 of the way. Donor 10 walks away, doesn't want to because the recipient 10 has already received. You can't even have recipient 10, you cannot pull the pair out because the recipient 10 has received already, okay? So what happened was that recipient 10 really put the pressure on donor 10 to follow through, all right? And I think it was actually a relative, so they really, there was a lot of pressure on this donor 10 to follow through. And finally they did, so it didn't break it. But it doesn't mean necessarily, when you have so many, it doesn't mean necessarily that the chain is going to be broken from there down. It just means that the team has to get very creative, very fast, and see what's the next match that can be done. All right? Or if recipient 10 has an alternate donor, because maybe recipient 10 has another possible match that could consider replacing the guy who walked out. All right? So it gets very intense, very creative. But you have literally dozens of surgeons throughout the country involved in this with their institutions, and it's pretty complicated, but it can be done. And it was done in 2012, and there's the documentation. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that can be done today with living organs, with living organ transplantation, which is fascinating. All right. So this one down here is just one, but there are all kinds of articles. You can punch that in and you get others, different articles on the news, emphasize different angles of the whole thing, the personal stories, but it's very exciting. Loyola, I think, Loyola is the one that ended it in Chicago. And this fellow, Don Terry, was the final recipient. So he was recipient number 30. This guy was sweating bullets for about 4 months, hoping and praying that the chain would go through. Yeah. He literally depended on 30 donors. Right? It happened. Yeah. This also points out, I mean, you imagine the level of creativity and sophistication and planning that has to go into this, right? Logistics and all that, not to mention the cost of the Medicare, et cetera, for the donor, it's all free. And it's an operation that may be $20,000, $30,000, $50,000. I have no idea, but for the donor, it's totally free. Now,
probably today's technology, they have a program that can.
Exactly, algorithms, they do. They have algorithms.
That's
they sure do.
Schedules down in
Yeah.
the classroom.
Exactly. Even on the donors list, on the recipient list, because I know a little bit more about this. I'll tell you the second half of the class. But right now there are about 90,000 people in the United States alone on the waiting list for kidneys. okay, 90,000. And about 10 to 15 die every day from lack of kidney, all right? So, because they're on renal failure. And so that's the greatest demand. And that's why all the nasty stuff that is occurring also with organ traffic and all that, all right, because there's such a high demand. But the exciting thing is that one can also donate and keep on living if one is healthy enough to do so. All right, so it can save the life of a person. Okay, I'll get to that in the second part of the.
I think it was a priest in the archdiocese who did that, right, Bob?
Yeah, I think so. I heard about that case. Okay, so this is the simplest case is the pair exchange. And right, we talked about it. All right, so now there are exchange programs, and this has all been regulated already and standardized, if you will, at the national level and at the international level. But at the end of the day, pretty much, at least for the US, it's within the US borders, okay? Because there are other considerations, like we know that in Europe, for example, the practice of medicine is somewhat different. So there are some nuances that are different between them and us. The registries are two main agencies that are handling this. One is the allocation of, one is the procurement of the organs, and the other one is the allocation. So the receiving and the giving out of the vital organs. Before all this happened, there was an act in Congress, right, that is known as the National Organ Transplant Act. It was in 1984. These are laws, these are federal laws in Congress that was enacted to facilitate organ transplantation, the giving and the receiving and all this, so that it would be legal on the up and up, and to try to minimize as possible the corruption that could go on here, because I can tell you in this area, the money can flow, all right? If one is a millionaire and is on renal failure, that one can get on the internet and buy an organ on the internet on the black market. Okay, so it's organ trafficking, there's human traffic, there's organ traffic. It is amazing on the dark web what exists there.
But how does that work, Father? Because even if you buy it, somebody has to install it, basically.
Yeah, it's called transplant tourism. We'll get there. The whole team, the whole surgical team goes. Yeah,
Wow.
there are doctors who believe in doing that, sadly, for money. Oh, yeah, transplant tourism. And the target country is China, where they do this stuff. Okay, so what do we have? We have for the organ procurement, all right, is the OPTN, it's a network. The Organ Procurement Transplantation Network, you just punch it in and they have a website, the OPTN. These are the ones that are officially recognized to receive vital organs for transplantation in the United States. They actually keep a registry. So this is all virtual, if you will. They keep a registry of the organs that may be becoming available. It's a 24-hour thing, you know, it's updated live as people are dying in trauma centers throughout the US, and they do the serotyping and all that. If they had on their license organ donor, then they go on the registry, and within 24 hours, they attempt to find a match. All right, so it's all, you can see it's at the computer level, right? Then on allocating the organ is another agency that is called the United Network for Organ Sharing, UNOS, or the acronym for short. And this is the agency that actually does the allocation. So what happens, these two agencies are in constant communication, all right, 24/7 on the internet, sharing their database to see who's a match with whom, all right? And they move it. And the idea is to move it within that window of 24 hours, less if possible. And so they try to find the match not only by serotyping, but also by region, so that if they're in the same city, that's the ideal. Or if they're in nearby cities, that's a shorter flight and so forth. Okay, so you can see the logistics behind this is pretty sophisticated and exciting, but they get into it, all right? So these are the two agencies that have the legal expertise and the legal right to do this in the United States. Anything outside of this is really illegal, because then these agencies are certified by the government and controlled, and they have their control systems in place and all that. So you got OPTN, who is the registry for organs that are available. And then you got UNOS, who is allocating the organs to the needy people, to the patients in need, all right, to the recipients. Okay, so it can get very detailed and specific. As we know, it is individualized, personalized medicine for sure. Now, this is when one goes on the registry. The alternative to this is when one is donating a target donation. It's called a targeted donation. I'm speaking specifically about, it can happen with several organs, but the most common one, again, is with kidney, all right? Because it's also the simplest transplant, the simplest surgery of them all, the less sophisticated one. And targeted donation in the United States bypasses the list, the registry, which is, this is where the 190,000 kidney patients are waiting on the list, okay? So targeted donation means that a donor is given to a recipient, a specific donor given to a specific recipient, all right? That bypasses the list. And sometimes, many times it's family members or a close friend or someone like that. Or it could be also anonymous.
That's what happened to my cousin.
Yes?
Was targeted donor.
Yes. Was he donor or recipient? Your cousin?
He's a recipient.
He's a recipient.
He's a doctor himself too, in Jamaica.
Oh, yes?
Yeah, but
Wow.
he came up here.
He came here to do it.
Yeah, he came here.
And he had a targeted donor.
Yes, yeah, that private donor.
Was that anonymous, or was a relative
No.
or friend?
My mom's family is huge, so.
Okay, so it was some relative, some distant relative.
Yeah, somebody from the family.
Excellent. There you go. It was a distant relative, so it had a better match, right?
Yes.
Because the genes were somewhere in there. And that was a target donation. So that solved the problem. So that bypasses the list, all right?
And this was like the last fourth or fifth person on the list.
Oh, really?
That proved out to be the proper fit.
Donor.
Right, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
donor, yeah.
three or four other donors were considered before him.
Oh, no,
before
quite
the-
a few before.
Oh, quite a few, eh? Wow. And non-matched.
Not much.
Exactly.
This 1 year.
Yeah.
came up and-
Yeah, sometimes I know the case of a daughter and a mother, and the mother was not a match, but a friend was a match.
Wow.
The mother was willing to donate to the daughter, and the mother was not a match. Yeah, but a friend who is unrelated, totally unrelated, was a match.
But could this work with the domino effect thing?
It can also, yeah, it can work.
Yeah.
This is, so the targeted donation is by definition a targeted, the domino is a targeted donation,
Yeah.
because
Okay, yeah.
the doctors know who they are. They may keep the recipients not knowing who the other are, anonymous, okay, but the surgeons certainly know, all right? So in that way, it is targeted, and it's all about the match. All right, next,
One quick question, Father.
Yeah.
If let's say you sign up as a donor,
right?
can they screen you before you're a living donor, right?
Right,
So you say, okay,
Sorry, I lost
I'm
you.
ready to give. So
Yes.
they'll screen you first to
Yes.
see, and then go to that list up on top.
exactly.
Oh,
Exactly. And they move it quickly, right?
Yeah.
And the typical screening first to find a match is just a blood test, okay? A blood
Okay.
sample. Yeah, because it's a serotyping. So that's where they start, in the blood.
yeah.
They start with the blood. And then if there is a match, then the donor has to go through a whole series of certifications or clearance by several doctors, okay? First, you need clearance from the GP. I'm talking about the donor.
Yeah.
You need clearance from your GP. Then you need clearance from the specialist on the organ. Let's say if it's going to be a kidney, you need a clearance from a nephrologist, and typically also a urologist if it's kidney, all right? And then they also do a mental health clearing, which is interesting. Why is the donor donating? Okay, and really it has to be altruism, and no other motives, second motives that may be there. Okay, so this is a good moment to take the break, because then I want to give you a particular case on how this happened. And yeah, and then within that second part, we can look at some of the bioethical issues that come up, consent and things like that. But so here we are with donor recipient. One thing is cadaveric. For cadaveric, of course, what's the crucial thing on the side of the cadaver, bioethically speaking, is that the person be declared dead, clinically dead, right? And it could be either in the classical death of no heartbeat and no circulation, or brain death. But brain death has to be total brain death, including the brain stem, right? And then that typically happens, tragically, from a lethal trauma to the head. And the typical donors of that, or the typical case, car accident, and more specifically, motorcycle accident. When that fellow flies out, when that fellow lands, typically they land on their head, and that's the end of that. You know. And so those are the typical organ donors are motorcycle accident victims. Yeah? But if they don't have it on their license, maybe a relative could donate, but it's very awkward to approach relatives when they're mourning the death of their son or daughter, all right, and ask them for the donation. But some people are brave enough to do that. Anyway, I want to break here for a moment. Will give me time to go get the gowns, and then I want to give you a case of a living donor here in the Archdiocese of Miami. Okay, so any questions or comments of what we've covered so far? No?
Does age comes into consideration?
Yes, and it used to be around 65. I think that upped to about 70 now for the donor. For the recipient, I don't know. I think it's more individualized. All right, it depends a lot on their particular health for the recipient. But for the donor, they've put it a little higher because the technology has gotten better, the surgeries now, it's even done laparoscopically, all right? The retrieval, not for the recipient, but for the donor, they can take out the kidney laparoscopically, not even have to open the donor side to side, all right?
Well, how about the age of the donor compared to the age of the recipient?
No, not
Doesn't
much.
matter?
No,
A 20-year-old donor
right.
donating to a 50-year-old person?
Yes, in fact, I know a friend of mine who received the heart, it was cadaveric. He's in his, we're about contemporaries, he's in his 60s, I would say late 60s. And he got the heart of a 20-year-old motorcycle accident.
Turn back the clock.
Exactly, big time. So he got a very young heart. And his heart was down to 10%, okay? Wow. It took him, no, even, it was less than 10%. So him and the wife, they live in Homestead and they have a townhouse, and it would take him the whole day, well, half a day to come down the stairs and the other half of the day to go up the stairs. He had to literally crawl very slowly up and down. The heart was so poor. Wow. The circulation was totally shot, you know. Of course, for several years, he was on the heart list for 10 years.
Now he springs up his death.
And yes, in fact, the first thing he did when after the operation and he recovered and all, he had gone to therapy, he started dancing cumbia, and he sent a video, he sent a little YouTube of him dancing cumbia, you know, because he's Colombian, he used to dance a lot, he was a great dancer and all that. He couldn't have, if he had done that before, he would have dropped that right there. Okay, so it's amazing and he had rejected 2 hearts already, okay, because it wasn't a perfect match and there were some issues with the donor. One, I think, had been a cancer patient at some point or something like that. So he had already rejected 2. And this was, the third was a charm, because if he rejects, on average, if he rejects the third possibility, then he's no longer, he's taken off the list. Qualifies anymore. He's getting too picky. But yeah, thanks be to God. And to this day, it worked. It's been about 3 years now. Recently, they just went to Colombia to have his teeth done because he has insurance down there. It's incredible. It's a very beautiful story that he's living because of someone, at least this young person, at least had the sense of putting in his license or her license. It can be boy, girl, so it doesn't have to be the same sex. They put on their license that they were organ donors. Yeah. Okay, so can you give me about 20 minutes or so? It's 10:44. Let's try to round back around 11. Okay. And I'll go over to get the gowns. Here we go on the pause. All right, for the folks online. Pause recording. Here we go. Okay, thank you very much for the reminder, Father Dayan. So let me pick up again. We're talking about the organ transplantation. I'm focusing briefly on cadaveric organ. Just to recap, that the person has been declared clinically dead. So now we no longer have a person as such. What we have is a cadaver, all right? But the organs within that cadaver are still living to some extent because the dying process is a process that takes time. So different organs will die at different times, and what they do is for people who are organ donors, they give what is known as vascular support. Vascular support, and they may also put that cadaver on a vent, which is a little awkward to see because you have a cadaver who is on a vent and the chest is moving up and down and the heart is beating, but that person is dead. Okay, so it's a little awkward at first. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yes, you hope it doesn't happen around Halloween time. Yes, but that's what they do. I mean, they're getting very creative to save those organs because precisely those organs can save the life of a person, okay, or multiple persons if they're donating a kidney to one person and the lungs to another, the heart, the cornea. They'll harvest everything that can be harvested, all right? Okay, so there's this support that is offered, this clinical support to maintain the organs of the cadaver alive. However, that doesn't mean that the person is alive. And how can we determine that medically, clinically? Because those living organs, they're vital organs, they're alive, but they're not integrated. They're not integrated, meaning that the nervous system is not doing its function, all right? And that's why that definition of neurological criterion, the neurological criterion of total brain death, including the brainstem, which is where we have the autonomic nervous system that takes care of heartbeat and pulse and breathing. So if it wasn't for the vent and the vascular support, this cadaver would not be breathing and the heart would not be beating, okay? Because the natural normal center of integration is already dead, which is the nervous system. So you see how relevant brain death, total brain death, is to the transplant scenario, all right? So based on that. And we as Catholics, we accept that as long as it's total brain death again. All right, now I want to move into the living donor issue, because like I mentioned, we had a case here in the Archdiocese of Miami where a priest was crazy enough to donate a kidney, and that priest was me. So about a dozen years ago, I donated a kidney. And you can tell from my talking that I'm still living. And about the same lifestyle that I had before the donation, which is really, I mean, this is the proof of the pudding, no? That it can work. I did a little write-up on it, post facto, describing the process from the donor perspective. But this was when I was still in Philadelphia at the NCBC, and that's the friend that what I was mentioning. It was she's a parishioner from I knew the family from St. Kevin Parish when I was pastor there, and this lady, well, became friends of the family. And this lady has a complicated medical history. She had a stroke about 30 years ago, and she had already had 2 cadaveric donations. She had gone through 2 cadaveric kidneys, all right? The first one lasted about 15 years. The second one went wrong since the beginning. It only lasted about 4 or 5 years, and she went on renal failure practically immediately after the second transplant, both cadaveric. But it was not total renal failure, it was partial, and she deteriorated over time. In the meantime, her parents were getting older, and she was taking care of her parents, and she had a complicated medical history and social history. So basically she needed help, and I knew that, I knew from theory, I knew from biology that one can donate a kidney and keep on living. So I said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and see if we have a match first. And not say anything to her. And if we have a match, I'm willing to donate, because what am I doing with 2 kidneys, right? So I knew that her transplant had been at the at Jackson, at the transplant center in Jackson, which is the only one that I know of is doing the transplants here in the county. Like I said, I was living in Philadelphia back then. I was working full-time with the NCBC, the National Catholic Bioethics Center. And so I just called Jackson and I told them about my purposes, and if they wanted, if they would honor, keep it anonymous for now, if they would do the blood typing, because they had her serotyping on record, if they would do the typing beforehand and let me know if there's a match before I would say anything, because if there's a no match, then it's mute, right? Why encourage someone if it's not going to go through? So I said, fine. They sent me the kit by FedEx up to Philadelphia. And then at the parish where I was at, happened to be, there were many Filipinos. You know, the Filipinos are very Catholic, and they come over, and many of them become nurses. And I found out that apparently in the Philippines, they study nursing in the Philippines, and they get certified as RNs and whatnot in the Philippines. And then that certification is valid in the US. Apparently, it's just about the only country, or one of the few countries, that the US recognizes those nursing schools as accredited, all right? And therefore, that's why we have so many Filipino nurses. I think it's more prevalent in the Northeast. But anyway, these Filipinos, they knew me, and they were nurses. So I asked one of them, I said, sure, Father, I'll draw your blood, no problem. So on a Sunday afternoon after Mass, we went into the directory, and there was about 7 different tubes. They were heparinized, in other words, so that the blood would not coagulate. And she took out the samples. We put them in the box, not refrigerated, because once the blood is heparinized, it doesn't have to be. If it's done, you know, within 24 hours. Shipped the box back to Jackson, and then about 1 to 2 weeks later, the results came back, and we were a match. We were a match of about 3, all right, which is very good. It qualified for the transplant. And this is the lady I was talking about, that her own mother, who wanted to donate, did not qualify, because she was less than 2.5, which is amazing, but that's how it happens. So this thing is a very individualized thing, and we're certainly not related, to my knowledge, at all. But it was the match. And then eventually we went ahead, did the transplant. And for me, it was laparoscopic. In other words, for the donor, it was a laparoscopic surgery, which was very good. And that's why I know a little bit more about the process, okay, because I went through it. And including the mental part was interesting. Thanks be to God, I cleared all the other doctors. And then the mental was precisely, that was the question. What would you do or think if it failed? You know, if after donating one of your kidneys, the patient either dies, or a week later, or a month later, or a year later, she goes into renal failure with your kidney, what's going to happen? I say, well, doctor, I believe in God, and if it's God's will, you know, we'll leave it in his hands. But if it fails, it fails, but at least we tried, right? And apparently that was the right answer. He says, well, you're crazy enough to donate. And he certified, he cleared me. And then that was the final clearance, all right? And the surgery itself was interesting. For me, it was only about 4 hours. For her, it was about 12 hours because they leave the previous kidneys there. You know, they don't bother taking out the other ones. They're dead. But she had a lot of adhesions inside the abdominal from 3 surgeries already. And plus the first one was actually kidney pancreas, was double transplant. And that pancreas is still on her from 30 years ago. It's incredible. So at any rate, her operation was very, very long because they had to, most of the time was just preparing the site for receiving the kidney. You know, a lot of adhesions in that abdominal area. But for me, it was 4 hours. And it was done robotic, it was laparoscopic. There was this machine, it's called a Da Vinci, which has these tubes, all right? It looked like an octopus. And they did ended up doing 4 incisions, but the 3 incisions around the abdominal area. 1 incision, I think they put in a camera and a light simultaneously in the tube. Another incision is like a cauterizing scissor, but the scissor is ultrasonic, okay? It's by vibration. And at the same time that that vibration is cutting through the tissue, it's also sealing it, it's cauterizing it, all right? So it's like plastic. It really is minimal blood, practically no blood led, okay? And then the other tube is to blow my abdomen up with CO2. So they generate a chamber. They create a chamber, and that's the painful one. The most pain was passive because once they build that chamber, they need literally a little chamber in there in which to maneuver. That one is the most painful thing at the end because that CO2, they don't suck it out. I think maybe they suck out some of it, but they it's kind of too dangerous to be sucking that out. So they leave it there. And it has to pass through the tissue passively, has to be absorbed by the tissue. And in the meantime, you have this 2, 3, or 4 days of, it's like, you feel like gas,
Yes.
right? But it doesn't really pass. It actually has to go into the intestines and get passed through the intestines eventually. But that was the most painful and comfortable thing, was that gas, really, which is totally secondary, you know, to the operation itself.
How did they get it out?
Exactly. That was the 4th incision, was around the navel. They do like a U shape around the navel. And so and that's the one time that they actually have to go in, the hand of the surgeon has to go in and literally pull out the kidney once the kidney has all been cut loose of its renal arteries and veins and all that, okay? And so the surgeon who did me was a Chinese Jamaican lady, Dr. Chan, because being a woman, first of all, she's petite, and then her hands are small.
I know her.
You know, Dr. Chan? Yes. And so the idea is this, that that incision only needs to be as large as the hand of the surgeon. So Chan does.
Her name is Olive, Dr. Olive Chan.
Olive is her first name? Okay, yeah. Olive Chan. She's Chinese Jamaican, and she's petite and small, and she's the one that was on me, on the donor, okay? And then Dr. Burke was on the recipient. But yeah, they did it like that. On the 3rd day, they kicked me out of the hospital. I was recovering for about 10 days, you know, and that's it. It was about a dozen years ago. And the lady's still living. That kidney, her PSA is even smaller than mine. The creatinine is at 0.9, which is, creatinine level is a protein that is produced by the kidney, and they measure the creatinine level to see how healthy the kidney is, right? And like I have a creatinine of about 1.4 or something like that. She has a creatinine of 0.9, 0.9. So they gave her the better kidney.
So your kidney works better in her than
It works better on her than me. Yeah. It does. It does. It's amazing.
They
But
do that gastric Father, when they do hernia surgeries.
yes, the hernia, anything abdominal, hysterectomies, it's amazing. This surgery.
I never felt that after my surgery.
Uh-huh.
I don't think they use gas on me.
No,
for my last surgery.
Really?
Yeah, I was never.
you never had that.
Basically, no blood.
Right, right.
No blood.
There's no
and
blood.
There was no.
Yep.
It's more uncomfortable than anything else.
Exactly. Yes. Oh, another thing that hurt was my back, el omoplato, what do you call that? Shoulder blade, right? On this one. And that's because, and I couldn't understand why the shoulder blade was hurting so much after the surgery. And he said, because they put you in a position where they tie the hand back here, only on one side, one handed tied down on the surgery, because people who are asleep, they have a tendency to move their arms
Yes.
unconsciously. And of course, if I do this and all the tubes are there, that's a major problem.
They told
Okay.
me that too after my
Right?
surgery. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they tie this hand back here, and that was hurting later because I was there for 4 hours like this. But it's amazing. It's the least expected stuff, you know.
Well, I applaud you for this.
Yes.
Well, thanks. I mean, it was.
That's incredible.
It was truly, to me, it was really no big deal. Just thinking that it could be done, and daring as I am, I said, well, let's give it a try and see what happens. You can see that just the proof is in the pudding. You know, once I read that, once I wrote this article, it got published. As you can see, the Medics and Ethics and Medics is a monthly publication of the NCBC, okay, for years and years. And it goes out, and many priests are subscribed to it, and sometimes bishops subscribe and they send it to the priest. Wouldn't you know it that one of the priests was inspired to do the same thing? A few years later, I think he was in Texas, and he went ahead, he read it, he didn't know me, and he went ahead and he also donated a kidney to a parishioner. Yeah.
I see here that you have a section where you encourage.
Yeah.
Right.
peace and-
At the very end. And at that time in particular, I was encouraging priests and nuns, all right, because we just have a simpler lifestyle, all right? We don't have a family-specific physical family to maintain in case something does happen. Also, if I go on kidney failure, I'm more likely to be able to find a donor than an individual person because so many people know me, right? So many people know priests and
The
nuns.
exact sentence in your,
Sorry?
in your reading the exact
Oh, yeah,
sentence, right?
there at the end, yeah. Yeah, those are it's just things that I thought of, that it would be easier in general for a priest or nun to find a donor, you know, a willing donor, simply because we're just valued by people, all right? So those are the reasons. But I figured maybe after 50, being that the age limit now has moved up into the 70s, all right? I would say maybe after 50 in general, for people to consider it, because already they've lived half their life, okay? And maybe the children are more grown and whatever, and they're still healthy enough to donate. For example, when I was already in my 50s, so I'm 66 now, it's about 54 or something like that, 55, when I did the donation. And so it was a great experience, spectacular. Even the TV came, the news, it was on the news. They did a big write-up on it from the Jackson Center, the transplant center, because they were trying to encourage donations also, you see, just altruistic, they call it altruistic donations. And so that was a very happy thing that happened in my life and the life of this lady and her family. So that's the write-up. Therefore, consider it, because truly, when you think about it, there are about 90,000 people on the list. I haven't checked for a while, but it's always high up there on the waiting list for a kidney. And like I say, an average of 10 to 15 die every day because they just renal failure. Some people just give up and they stop the dialysis and all that. And then I did the math on this 90,000. If we take just the adult population in the US, which may be around 200 million or so, and do the math, is less than 0.1%, not 1%, less than 0.1% of the American population donated one kidney, would wipe out that list totally, you know, because when you compare 90,000 to 200 million, it's nothing.
There's another restriction and so far, right?
Yep.
I was went for my cousin,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't get medical clearance because
You-
I have type 2 diabetes.
Oh, yes, exactly.
Yes.
Right. So that's the,
it needs a lot of
exactly.
things.
Yes, it does. The person has to be healthy for sure,
Yeah.
because they're not going to compromise the health of a patient,
Yes.
of a person, you know, who's healthy for saving someone else.
Like
So-
95,000 people wait for a kidney.
95.
95,000.
Yeah. So it's about the same. It's maintained there more or less about the same.
There's more people waiting for a kidney than any other.
Yes, by far. Oh, yes.
Wow.
It's the
So
most, yeah.
so it would-
But you see, that's, again, it's kind of the old type in the blood, you know? It's the universal donor, and we can only receive from O, but it's the most common one. So when you think about it, it's the easiest donation to do, even living. Forced cadaveric, in principle, you have two kidneys, but in living, everyone potentially is a living kidney donor, right? In principle. But of course, the health does count in. If someone has cancer, for example, they don't qualify, or if they had chemotherapy or
Any
diabetes,
kind
or
of
something.
blood pressure issues.
High blood pressure, right?
Blood
Because
pressure, yeah.
yeah, why high blood pressure is true. Why the blood pressure disqualifies a donor, a potential donor. Who does the osmoregulation? Who does the pressure control of the body? The kidneys. The water, remember, it's the water, it's the amount of water in the blood that maintains the pressure. Okay, so you take out water, you put in water, you take out water. And so the kidneys are osmoregulators. And the kidneys need to draw water necessarily because they're getting rid of toxins. But the toxins are dissolved in the water. Okay, so urine is mostly water, right? And that's why kidneys are osmoregulators. And therefore, someone with high blood pressure disqualifies them because their kidneys are very important. Yeah. So anyway, these are the issues. Then one last slide here. We can finally look at some bioethical issues, many bioethical issues that you can think of here, right? But the very first one for cadaveric, for sure, is going to be the determination of death, of brain death, that it be total brain death, all right? I think I've driven that to death, that concept. Also, with regards to consent, obviously, the recipient is going to consent because they don't want to die. In fact, I'll tell you, some people on dialysis, they're kind of scared of the operation. They're scared of kidney transplant, and they don't want to. They're on dialysis, but they don't want a donor.
For dialysis, you can't be doing dialysis to receive life.
I know dialysis eventually will kill you, or they'll
Yeah.
desist. You know, they'll let it go. Yeah, it's a terminal game with dialysis. It may be years, but yeah. But some people are just afraid of surgery. You know, there was in fact, I'll tell you, and there's no way you can identify the person, but there was a nun, there was a sister when I was in Philadelphia, and I was going through the process. I was talking in the parish where I was, and I was talking, and this group of nuns, they were very involved in social justice, right? And they were feeding the poor in the neighborhood because it was a poor neighborhood and so forth. And I asked one of the nuns there, would you consider donating a kidney? And he said, oh no, Father, I'm just basically a chicken and I can't stand blood and I can't stand surgery or needles or anything like that. I'm too chicken, I'm not gonna donate a kidney. So for her, it was non-negotiable. You know, she was just, didn't want to have anything to do with surgery or anything like that. Some people are like that, you know, it's a perception, it's a very subjective thing, okay? It's subjective. But the consent, of course, is crucial for the ethical analysis. There has to be consent all over the place. In principle, informed consent, of course, and consent of the living person. And if it's cadaveric, then it has to be proxy, but it also has to be legal. In other words, the person consenting for a cadaver has to have the legal right to do that, which involves a durable power of attorney and the living will and the stuff that we have talked about earlier, right? Okay, what else? Payment versus altruistic. Thanks be to God, at least in the United States, this is illegal to pay for organs or tissues, all right? It's highly illegal. It's actually organ trafficking, but in other countries, it's happening, unfortunately. It's still illegal, but they turn a blind sight, or they're getting kickbacks. It's back to the old corruption thing, all right? To the point that there is multi-billion-dollar industry in organ trafficking, in human trafficking, and in all this. And so the stories that you hear about of someone waking up in a bathtub one day full of ice and with a sign, "Welcome to the organ donor club," right? These are people, it happens occasionally. They go into typically poor countries, Latin America, Africa, Asia, typically Latin America because of the Caucasian, right, issue. Or the poor people will sell their kidneys for $200, $300, $400, and then that agency will turn around and resell that kidney for $20,000, $30,000, or $40,000, a humongous markup. And people will sell. In India, it became a scandal. Poor people were selling their kidneys for, $100. That would be like 2 years' salary or something like that. Okay, so it's the dark side of this is very, very dark, but it's there, and we have to be aware of it. It's obviously a huge bioethical issue. The transplantation tourism, this is highly organized. This is totally rogue, of course. This is illegal, but some people with a lot of money can put together a team of surgeons, nurses, and all kinds of the equipment that is needed. They fly everything into another country in a private plane, and they do it. They just rent a facility, one room or one facility from a hospital, and they're in and out in 24 hours, and they do the transplantation. Okay. So this is happening out there. The final one is this one, which is very interesting: opt-in or opt-out. In the United States, what we have here is opt-in. And in most countries of the world today, it's still opt-in. But a few European countries are considering opt-out for cadavers. This is what I'm talking about. Unless we specify on the driver's license or leave it somewhere written or tell some people that upon my death, I want to donate my organs, the transplantation team would not come near my cadaver to harvest organs because it's illegal. All right, so I'm opting into the donation, all right, and that's the standard, certainly the standard in the US and in most countries of Europe also. The standard is to opt into donating organs. Some European countries are beginning to talk about, they're having a national dialogue about opting out upon death, all right? In other words, the presumption that this person would donate their organs when they die, unless specified, I don't want to donate. I'm still on the fence on it in this sense. What am I doing with my organs in the grave? If they're good, if I die if my liver is still good, if my heart is still good, if other organs are still good, what are they doing in the grave? They're feeding worms, whereas they could really save the life of a person. However, there has to be that national dialogue. In other words, this has to become something that people know as they're growing up, that the standard is becoming, when you die, we assume that you want to donate your organs unless you specify that you don't, and then give them the proper forms for opting out and all that. It can be incorporated into the social fabric of the nation and schools, and the dialogue that can go on at home. Obviously not do it with kids, but maybe from teenagers or young adults forward, right? Have that kind of discussion. And also it would come from a society that has more of a social conscience. Precisely in Europe, for example, they've gone to socialized medicine. They're paying taxes through the nose, precisely so that they have socialized medicine. But there is that social conscience awareness, all right, that could eventually lead to a nation having opting out. I can see a way to it, but it will require a tremendous education campaign, if you will. Always with the option to opt out. In other words, be given the means for saying, no, I want to keep my organs when I die. So how do you see it? You see, that would be eventually some possibility, considering that those the organs that are in the grave could actually save the life of people. John.
I hate to think of this, but I have to bring it up. So
Mhm.
discussing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, somebody said, "Oh," and I don't necessarily believe this, but I want your opinion.
Yeah.
That if somebody sees you're an organ donor and you are on your deathbed,
Right.
they're not going to try to save you,
Right.
because they're going to want to use your organs.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly. And that has come up, and it comes up apparently in paramedics. Okay. But it also comes up now with the opt-in. I'm sorry, can we have that door closed? Thanks. It's happening with opt-in because I've heard that now this is, what is that called? Scuttlebutt, this is just talk, all right, anecdotal. But I've heard that sometimes paramedics, if you have organ donor, they may treat you one way. If you don't have organ donor on your license, they may treat you another way. That's what I've heard. It doesn't sound legal to me. I'm sure it's not legal, all right? But at the end of the day, you're dealing with human beings, and who knows? Because I think that paramedics are predisposed toward organ donation, right? I'm sure many of them are organ donors. They have it on their license. So they may treat that person who is on the verge of death in an accident, in a very serious accident. It can go either way depending on the treatment or lack of treatment that they're giving on the spot, like CPR or who knows what. Mm-hmm. But it's a very good point, but I can tell you from what I've heard, and I don't really have the evidence for it, but anecdotally, I've heard this from more than one person, that it can happen now at the level of the paramedics, okay, which are the first responders.
how would they treat them?
Right, so we would have to follow the scenario through to the point that they would favor, if the person has organ donor, all right, to have the person be declared clinically dead fast, all right, so that they can move them into the transplant scenario.
They don't do
Yeah.
everything they can to
Possibly.
Their first priority will not maybe be to save you, but
Exactly.
to maintain your body so you can
Right.
so they can
Exactly,
do the harvest of the organ.
right.
I think the other issue to follow,
Mhm.
and I've heard those stories,
Mm-hmm.
is it becomes now a judgment call
Yes,
on behalf of the paramedics.
yes, very much.
Yeah. And so, not all the time our judgment is skewed towards the common good.
Exactly. It's on an individual basis. It really is on an depending. It's a very complex scenario. What is the level of trauma of the accident, right?
Exactly.
Or it could be from old age. For example, CPR, they normally do CPR. Standard, they do CPR unless there is a DNR order somewhere or the next of kin. But if there's no one around, they'll do CPR even on the elderly. And they'll go ahead and break those ribs and stuff. But if there's someone around that says, no, this person didn't want it, then they'll back off. So it's really, it's very, very iffy.
It's really the opt-out, the issue from me,
Hmm.
I'm just
On opt-out, yeah, no, this is just, yeah.
Right now, if a law is passed, for instance, that everybody understands that they are organ donors.
Right,
We have an issue in our country where people can't even go to vote with an ID card.
mm.
Can you imagine this?
Yeah, so you're saying maybe the bureaucratic mess, the red tape that could happen?
Exactly.
Yeah,
And then some relative might come in and say, no. They told me that this not supposed to happen. So when you want to ask for something, a signature,
right. Well, it would have to be something like on the license,
that's
but it would be the reverse.
Yeah, that's a whole new. We can't
It is.
even get that on the license today willingly, because that's something. Okay, so you go for your driver's license. Well, you want me to put this on there for you?
Right.
Well, I don't know. I need to go talk to my family. first.
Exactly. So that is a lost opportunity there.
Yes,
Mhm.
it's a whole
It
new
is.
kind of worms.
It is. But you see, what I'm saying is that this would require basically a national effort, like a campaign, a sustained campaign for years after years to bring it up respectfully through media and so forth, to have that kind of national dialogue. I could see the possibility, but it would certainly be a big effort at the national level. You know, it'd have to be like a national priority. And I don't think we're there yet. I've heard a couple of European nations are considering it, mostly in Northern Europe, like maybe it may line up with nations who are also legalizing euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. Okay, because this issue's, it's kind of a pragmatic, it verges also a little bit on a utilitarian mentality, right? Why let those organs go to waste if we can make good use of them? Yeah. So, anyway, I put it out there simply because, as you can see, it's a controversial issue. It's bioethical controversial. The church officially has not made any declaration on it. The only declaration that the church has made on this topic basically is that in principle, the church is in favor of organ donation, as long as, of course, there's consent and it's done legally and every other thing is in place, all right? But in principle, all the recent popes have spoken in favor of organ donation several times, and even it came up pretty lively toward the end of John Paul II, if he would be an organ donor or not. It turns out that because of his illness, he didn't qualify. But he had spoken in favor of organ donation several times. Which brings me to another, now this is a little aside that is historical, but I just thought of it. And I think I mentioned it in the article, I'm not sure. But, you know, for many years, the church was against organ donation, all right? And it's because of this. On the part of the donor, it involves, I'm talking about living organ donation specifically. The part of the donor, it involves mutilation. It involves excising, taking out a healthy organ, right? And how can we justify? Sorry?
When was this?
This was like in the 50s when, yeah, good to frame it in the context of a time, because this was when certainly laparoscopy was not around and the surgery was not as successful, all right, back then. Most organ donations failed. The recipient died. Typically was cadaveric, and the recipient would die sometime afterwards. They didn't have anywhere near the lifespan that they have today. Talking about the 50s, thereabouts. But the church was against it in principle because it was seen strictly as a structural issue. In other words, how can we justify taking out, excising a healthy organ, you know, a vital organ from a healthy individual? In other words, there's no pathology, there's no illness there. How can we justify that surgery and everything else? Because it was seen structurally. Structurally meaning the actual physical organ and the health of the individual, of course. And then this Father Kelly, this theologian, reflected on the question because in the meantime, the clinical profession was advancing and little by little, the transplants were becoming more and more successful, all right? Cadaveric transplants were being more successful, including heart transplants, people living years and years with a second heart and so forth. And so he said, there's gotta be a way around this. We're locked into this blanket condemnation of organ transplants. But you know, it's a good thing in principle. It's benevolence and beneficence. So for kidneys in particular, but also for the other organs, the living organs, the liver also applies for liver and lung. He switched from the structural analysis to a functional analysis. What do I mean by this? Particularly for kidneys, paired organs. The living proof that with one kidney, and the last time they checked, I still only have one, the second one hasn't grown back, all right? Perfectly normal, healthy, I still do everything I used to do beforehand. And therefore, but I'm missing one of the two structures, I'm missing one kidney. But functionally, the other kidney has taken over. In fact, the other kidney, the remaining kidney is called a solitary kidney, grows a little bit. Only a little bit, but it grows. It does grow a little bit, you know, because of the extra effort that it's making, right? And it makes it grow a little bit. But functionally, it's doing the function of both, right? So that was the shift, and it's a theological shift from looking at the structures only to looking at the functional equivalent. And you have that. And now today, even in the ERDs, it says structural or functional integrity. So if we maintain the functional integrity of the renal system, then it is ethical to, it is justifiable to donate a kidney theologically from the Catholic perspective. But it was a shift, and it was a key shift to look at the function of the organ instead of the actual structure. All right. So it's called functional integrity. As long as the functional integrity of the organ is maintained, then a donation in principle is acceptable, as long as the other things are in place, of course. And so it was in the 50s, more or less, and it was groundbreaking. In fact, that analysis that he did was so outstanding that it went into the, I saw it first in the Catholic Encyclopedia when I was researching the background to this whole thing in Philly. All right. So creative thinking can be very positive at times. Folks, that's all I have. You've been very patient on this lecture, on this course, and on this program. And I want to thank you very, very much for
Thank you.
my pleasure and my honor. And now you are ambassadors, okay? So if you liked it enough to go through it, see who else you can get enthused about it and send them over. Yeah, we have a third cohort going on now, and there are 8, but 1 or 2 may be dropping. So it's getting a little smaller. But you know, this would be, the third cohort is moving through, but by next fall, by fall of 2019, I need to come up with another cohort. So if you want to come back for a refresher. But no, seriously, consider who else you might want to encourage about this. I'm going to do another mail out to the teachers in particular, and be very interested in knowing if the Archdiocese is going to come through on recognizing the master level for the salary-wise should go to a master's lane salary if someone has a bachelor. So that's an incentive. I did a little bit just simple arithmetic, and I figured that for the average high school professor, in about 3 years, more or less, going into a master's lane would amortize the cost of the program, which right now is about 16,000 or 16, 17,000. So, you know, it's worthwhile, because then from that third year forward, it's all gain, right?
Someone checked with Archdiocese from my school, and they said it's been approved.
It's approved, it's clear.
The
Okay,
salary increase.
excellent, super.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Excellent.
No, that they just checked that it's approved.
Right. So this is the issue. A high school teacher in particular. So you only need the following degree to teach the previous level. So, for example, to teach at high school, one needs a bachelor's. To teach college, one needs a master's. And to teach graduate school, one needs a PhD. Right. So that's the following. Many high school teachers, they have a bachelor's because that's all they need for high school. Right. But, and that's, so there's a bachelor's lane, salary level. But if you go into master's lane, then you get that extra salary for master instead of bachelor for teaching the same thing.
But you know what, Father?
What?
Several years ago,
Yeah.
the Archdiocese of Miami passed a rule or whatever,
Yes.
that to teach at a high school level,
Mm-hmm.
you have to have a master's.
Only religion and theology.
Only real.
As far as I know, it was only for religion and theology that they needed a master's in theology. Yes, that was because, in other words, and that made sense if you think about it from the Archbishop's perspective. He wanted to enhance, he wanted to make sure essentially that our high school religion and theology teachers were teaching Catholic religion and Catholic theology, okay? So he required that, and there were certain programs that were approved and so forth.
But no, I teach theology at OLA.
Exactly.
So this degree is not going to really help me then because I don't have a master's in theology.
Right, so this is what happens. You should be able to go into the master's lane salary-wise.
Teach at Archdiocese with the Archdiocese of Miami.
Yes,
Teaching Archdiocese.
yes,
Yeah, you're
yes,
fine.
because, yes, but, you know, he's teaching religion. And so there's that other qualifier that you need to ask about, you may have to take some religion courses specifically, or theology courses, to beef up that, what would be a master's in theology. You follow me?
That's why I need that information from you. And
Which is, yeah, okay. So you see what I'm saying? But as far as just salary, straight up, it should, with any master's, that was the whole, it came down to this, with any master's, going to a master's lane, then fairness means that that person should get a master's salary, aside
because-
from the specific requirements.
No, I'm thinking of the staff that we have there.
Yeah.
In theology at Ola.
Mm.
And we have 2 nuns that are teaching, so they would have their masters.
Right.
But I don't think the other teachers have their masters in theology. Probably 1 or 2. But there are 9 of us
In religion and theology.
in religion, in theology.
Right, in theology. 9. Okay. Yeah.
9.
Yeah, it's at an individual basis, you know, and then they were giving X number of years to do this.
3 years.
3? Yeah.
You do 3 years. to do
Exactly. So, yeah. Yeah, many of them decided to do it online, and they found some program out there and they did it online just to fulfill that
The
requirement.
online program is harder to follow.
It is. It turns out being
Very
harder. You have to
difficult.
write a lot and you don't have the direct contact like this. I mean, I don't like it as much, but some people do.
Because you know that's one of the reasons why I opted for this.
Yes, yes, I'm glad. Okay, folks, also we have at least Father Dayan and Andrea also has been online. Let me see, is there anyone else? I think you're both it. Let me put a little, okay, maybe Andrea. Okay, hi, putting you on the screen here.
Hi,
Okay.
everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Well,
Hello.
Thanks again. Let me
Thank
see.
you, Father Sophie.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Let me see, where's the speaker? Just give a little bit more volume here. So the only last thing then, all right, so you should be graduating in December. I think all the requirements are done on an individual basis. Some people may still need to finish up their hours and give me their mentorship form, but we'll work at that on an individual basis. For the rest, I'm not requiring a summary of this lecture, okay? But you will have the video. I'll send out the YouTube as always, so you have it for background. Then the certificate should come within, they have 60 days to process from the end of class. And the end of class is like December 14 or something like that. And then from there, 60 days. So it puts it in middle of February, I think, right? They have up to the middle of February to generate your official certificate of the master's. Mhm. Now, there is a detail. You can go online. I don't know, you should be receiving an email from the registrar's office, all right? And in that email, it should tell you how to log in, because you have to do one final thing. You have to log in and do something, like you have to put in your mailing address or something like that if you want it mailed. If you want it mailed. Or if you want to stop by and pick it up in person, they'll have it here after the 15th of February, all right? But if you want it mailed, then you have to go in and do that extra step. Because we had that special case with the first cohort. They were waiting for months and months and they didn't get their certificates. It turns out that they forgot to see that email, or somehow they didn't get that email, and it's not automatic that the registrar's office will mail it to you. You have to request it, okay? All right, so if you don't get that email between now and the 15th of December, let me know and we'll work it out. Yeah, because the course still has to finish. You know, the semester has to finish. The semester has to finish, all right? Which officially is, I think the 14th of December is the last day of finals. All right, for the rest, the gowns, I have the hoods and the gowns here. For those of you who are interested now, we can take a look there. I'll save the others if anyone else is interested. The actual ceremony would be mid-May. In mid-May will be the commencement ceremony here again. So I'm hoping that you all will come back for that. All right, but I can tell you, you'll need cap and gown and hood. You'll need the equipment. You'll need the regalia to walk. You'll be here, yeah, at the gym, at the Fernandez Center. That will be the ceremony, the commencement ceremony. Very beautiful, very big. And the reason why I have these, I just want to explain that briefly, is because, well, I think at this point, this is beyond the recording, is certainly not about transplants. So let me end the recording. Let me just end the lecture itself, stop recording.